I wasn't touching it.
So now we're on Daf Lamed Aleph from it Beis. We Kalim to Adam. Right, we have both Kalim and Adam, and this wave fell over them. Ma Adam to be in Kavana, just like an Adam. He has the capacity to have an intention as he waited for this wave to come. Af Kalim Nami to come Lu Adam. But it means that the person who is either wearing the Kalim or he was holding on to the kalim and he was waiting for the wave to come and envelop the kalim, but it's all b'kavana. And you'll say, and if you might ask me, so why do I need a chiddush that if he's waiting for the wave to come, that's called kavana? Of course it's called kavana. Of course it's a valid tefillah. I might have entertained the idea that ligzar mishum chardol is shal geshamim. Right, there's a case of rainwater that runs down a mountain slope, and that doesn't have the shear of a mikvah. And not only that, it's mayim zochalim, which means it's not water that was gathered together in a pool, in a pond. And we're going to think that just like we allowed and validated the tefillah when he was waiting there for the wave to come by, they might say, let's validate the tefillah when he waits for this running rainwater to come down from the mountain slope and envelop him. Inami, maybe I can have another Havamina and Xera, Ligzar Rishon Atu Kipin. Okay, so we're going to have a large discussion about Kipin, right? Kipin, it comes from the Sugin Yuma about arches and where do you put the mezuzah and so forth and so on. And with regard to keeping, right, we have a case of certain types of waves that look like arches in the way that the wave, swings around. That's called keeping. And in such a case where he gets enveloped by this wave, we're afraid that maybe that's not a good tefillah, which the Gemara is going to try to figure out why it's not a good tefillah. Kamashman lo gazrina. So therefore, we still maintain that really you need kavan. And your Yoshev umitzap. But there's a chiddush that we would have had a gzera and kamashman that there's no gzera. Now the Gemara says, so what is this case of keeping of these arches? Why can't you, if you have this wave with an arch, why can't you use it if it has 40 sof as tefillah mikvah the snan? And there's a problem here about whether or not it's a mishnah or a brisa because it says the snan, but lamaisa it's a tosefta in mikvos. Matbilin b'rishon v'ein matbilin b'kipin. So there are waves that are roy l'tfila, and there are waves that are not roy l'tfila. In the case of a rishon, which is called the top of the wave, that's okay for tvila, because the top of the wave is going to fall on top of the utensil that's sitting on the shore. That's called immersion. That's called tefillah. But ein matbilim b'kipin, we don't throw a utensil into the middle of a wave that's midair, that's arched over. And in that case, the tefillah is completely it's not non-starter. It's not mitayr. And therefore, we might have thought that maybe there's a gzera here, otu kifin, and kamash malon. That is not. So I guess in this case of kipin, what's happening is it's in the middle of the wave. It's not that the wave comes over, and then we could assume that the kli or the person was completely enveloped by the water, but rather you threw the kli into the wave, and there's like a hollow in the wave. That's why it's called an archway. And therefore, maybe
Right.
it could be that the utensil never really came or had minimum contact with the water. Okay, fine. So until now, you've established that Rav would hold that for Truma you need Kavana, and we have this principle that for Kodshim we're going to require Kavana. Or for Tum V'tara for Kodshim. But now the Gemara asks the other question: El Chulin de Loboy Kavana Minol. How do you know that in the case of something that's Chulin, like for example Isha Labaila, how do you know that you don't need Kavana in the Tvila? And the Gemara answers this now. We learned in a Mishnah, and he tells you here the Mishnah is in Machshirin that Perish and Naflu L'toch Amas Mayim. So you have now fruits that fell into a channel of water. Upashat mi sheyadav tmeos v'tnot. And somebody who has yadayim tmeos, shnios, what they call, he stretched out his hands and reached into the water. And he takes out the fruits. And the halacha is that since he put his hands into the water, amas mayim, yadav tahoros, his hands become tahoros. So this has to do with the Gzeres Chacham of Shnios L'Tuma, Yadayim Shnios. And the Mishnah says it's enough if he immerses his hands into a channel of water, even though he had no intention to purify himself. And this is going to prove to us that you can have tahara for the purpose of engaging in ordinary achilas lechem. That's called chul. Now we get to the machshirin part of this discussion. Uperos einon b'chiyita, meaning he had no clue that the fruits were now going to get wet. And for machshirin to accomplish their purpose to be machshir something kabul tuma, you need dumya de kiyitain. It's got to be similar to putting it in. However, let's say, for example, he wants to rinse his hands, and not only that, but he expects that the water is somehow going to also wet the peros, is then yadav tahoros, and now we have to be machmer and machshir nu peros b'chiyutin. Esvei Rav of Nachman, what do we do with a contradictory Mishnah in Chagiga? Toval lechulin v'huchsak lechulin. Now, what does the word v'huchsak mean? Huchsak means he had an intention. So he was tovel lechulin, and he had intention for chulin. In other words, he wanted to eat chulin, but he was shomer on tahara for chulin, but also l'maser. He's not allowed to eat maser sheni. Again, maser rishon has no kedusha, but maser sheni. So now Rav is medaik. Huchsak in, since he had intention to immerse himself for the purpose of eating chulin, therefore he's permitted to eat chulin. Lo huchsak lo. If he didn't have an intention, he would not be allowed to eat chulin. Meaning the tefillah would not operate to make his tara. So here we see clearly that even for chulin you need chuchsak, you need kavod. Hachi kamar. Rav Nachman says that's what the Tana means. Af al pisha chuchsak lechulin, even though he had in mind to immerse himself in order to eat chulin, aser b'maseh. And why is he aser b'maseh? Because he wasn't interested in tara for the sake of eating maseh. Esvei Rava asked the following kasha from the Mishnah Chagiga Tova v'lo huchsak. if he didn't have any intention to be tovel, is ki'ilu toval, my love, ki'ilu tovel klal, which means that even as far as chulin, the tefillah is not effective because he didn't have any intention. So you see that you need intention for tefillah even in chulin lo. Ki'ilu tovel lemaser. Maser is kodesh, and for maser you need a tefillah with an intention b'kavanah. Al tovel chulin, if he was only interested in immersing himself in order to eat regular food, chulin, and he didn't have any intention, nevertheless, it's legally effective. So we see that this is a reflection of what we saw in the Tana in Machshirin, and we're going to differentiate between chulin and kodshin and maser. Maser. Now, when Rav Nachman pushed away Rava, who saw Rava thought dichuye komatche is just pushing him off. Not that Rav Nachman was really genuinely of the opinion that the Mishnah in Chagiga only was applicable for chulin, and for chulin you don't require any kavana, but nafak dak v'yashkach. But Rava went out and he found that this is a serious business here, and he found a brisa that supports this thing. So he didn't have intention for tefillah. Nevertheless, mutar b'chulin ve'aser l'maser. Amalei Abaye l'Rav Yosef leima tevi tiyuf to the Rav Yochanan b'ha. Right, Rabbi Yochanan says that without kavana, not only is your tefillah ineffective for tahara, but it's also ineffective for chulin. And here we see that mutar b'chulin. Amalei, Rabbi Yosef says to Abaye, Rabbi Yochanan, who Diyomik Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef. You're right. This is against Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabbi Yochanan is hanging on to the coattails of another Tana by the name of Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef Omer, Ma Tamid Lomer Shenis. The word Shenis appears twice. And what was the purpose of repeating the word Shenis in Vayikra Perik Yud Gimel at the conclusion of the laws of Nigei Begadim? As if to say, the Torah twice repeats washing the garment. First, they washed the garment after the Kohen saw the tzaras on the beged. He orders the beged quarantined for 7 days. At the end of this period, if it hasn't spread, the Kohen will now say, let's wash the area of affliction. Now, after that, we have a second period of 7 days, and at the end of that period, if the affliction disappears, the garment shall be washed, the second time that it says washed. That second washing is actually tvila b'mikvah, to purify the garment. And makish tichbosa shnil tichbosas rishona, ma tichbosas rishona ledas. Right, what happened is that after the first, 7 days of quarantine, when that ends, the Kohen commands that they wash the area of affliction, and that's midas. Everybody knows what's the purpose of it, and therefore there's intention. Af tichboses shniya ledas, even the second tichboses, the second washing, should require das. Now, this has got to be a case of chulin. Let's just see if he points that out. Sorry. Yeah, I think we're talking about chulin here for sure. I malahalan be'ina das kohen. Okay, fine. the actual intention in the washing, meaning in the tefillah, was ibrik, was unnecessary. But we need the das of the Kohen, and he's got to agree that the nega did not spread. Talmud Loma V'Torah Mikol Makom, which means that forget about the Kohen. Somebody who's not a Kohen goes ahead and immerses this garment in Nigei Batim, and it's tar. So you see that Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef is teaching us that kavanah for Tvila is required even for chulin. Again, it doesn't say anything about chulin here, but I assume that somebody who has negat begadim, he wants to purify the beged and get rid of negat zaras. This is not kachim, and yet, nevertheless, we're saying that you don't even need kavana, and that's called mikol makom. But we have Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, and he's saying that you don't need das kohen, but you need das, which means intention. And Rabbi Yochanan was relying on Rabbi Yosef. Maskiv lo Rav Shimi bar Ashi. Umi Rabbi Yochanan. Is it true that Rabbi Yochanan holds that even for chulin you don't need kavana? You do need kavana. Ha'am Rabbi Yochanan Allah Kistam Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan is committed to paskin like any Mishnah that's anonymous. Utnana, we have a Mishnah as we learned already. The Mishnah that was quoted here on Amud Aleph. Nafla sakin v'shachata. Afal pishachta kedarka psula. Vavinan ba taima de nafla hahi pila hu. Ksheira afal gavdalo b'chavin. Had he thrown down the knife, there would be called gavra ma'isa shchita without kavana. V'amrina ma'tana d'lo boy kavana l'shchita omarova Rabbi Nosani. So we have an anonymous Mishnah that reflects the shita that you don't require kavana. And Rabbi Yochanan is committed to paskin like a stam Mishnah, an anonymous Mishnah. How can Rabbi Yochanan then say, no, we need kavana even for chulin? And the Gemara answers, b'shchita filu Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef. The machlokas here about whether you require intention is only in the case of nida, but it doesn't apply to shchita. In shchita, everybody agrees, even Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, that you don't require intention. And why is that? From the fact that if you slaughter an animal b'misasek without any kavan at all, it's possible. And why is that? Because it's kachim. So you see that there's a separate halach in kachim that you need kavana in shchitas kachim l'shem kachim. But michlal, we could derive from this that the chulin lo boy kavana. So it comes out that we thought that Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef was saying that you always need kavana for tefillah. That's not so. In chulin, for example, you don't need kavana l'tefillah. I shouldn't say that. That's not precise. Meaning in shechita you don't need kavana l'chulin, but in nida you need kavana. For Rabbanon, how the Rabbanon can explain this halacha of misasek b'kodshim pasul nehi delo be'ina kavana l'zvicha l'chaticha be'ina. When the Rabbanon are saying you require kavana, they don't require kavana for the heter shchita, but rather for the maisa of chatichas hasimon. Where did we have that before? I think we had it once before. Anyway, Omar Rava Baha Zikanhu Rabbi Nosson Rabbanon. There's one case in which Rabbi Nosson prevailed over the Chachamim. And why is that so? Miksiv v'chatachta v'zavachta ksiv. Ibi in kavana lechatich. If, as you say, like the Rabbanan, that you need kavana for chaticha, is afil zvicha nami liboy. Why don't you go a step further and say you need it for zvicha as well? Ilo be'ina kavana l'zvicha. If you're moda and you concede that you don't need intention for zvicha, all you need is for chaticha, is then chaticha nami lo liboy. You shouldn't require kavana for chaticha. I was hoping to get to the Mishnah on Lamed Beis. Do you have another 5 minutes, Ira, or where you want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay,
No,
we'll try.
okay.
We're going to try to like plunge for the finish line. I want to get to the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Beis. Hechi Tomi
Sure.
Nidosh and then Salutov. What's this case that somebody, fell into a mikveh unintentionally? If somebody pushed her in, is kavana de chaver to kavana mal. You see, why can't the kavana? This was I was saying this by chevshot v'kad v'gadol omin. Anyway, why can't her friend's kavana for tefillah be affected? And nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan says that she's asur l'bayla v'yod b'truma nami ochla. Maybe we should go a step further and say that she should be able to eat truma. And where do we find this concept that somebody else's kavana is meaningful? Like the case where somebody pushes you into the mikveh, or the case where the chereshat kodah, the gadol hachereshes vashod vasumish and nitrufa die. What does a woman do for mikveh to be mater herself to baila if she fits into one of these three categories? And the answer is in yeshlam pikchos misaknos osam, which is a pellet. I don't know exactly how they do this, logistically, because you need what's called a bedika b'chorin ustokin. So I don't know how this, this competent woman is going to do that for her. I mean, I understand that she can, make sure there are no chatzitzos and so forth and so on. But anyway, ochlos betrum. Anyway, we see that Rav and Rabbi Yochanan could not be arguing in the case where the nida was forcibly immersed, because then even Rabbi Yochanan would have to concede that there was intention. The case is where this nida fell from a bridge into a body of water that purifies her from nidus. And that's the case, according to Rabbi Nosson, where she's tahora. Notice the machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Nosson, since Rabbi Nosson does not require intention for shechita, Rav says therefore the isha for nida would not require any intention whatsoever. So Rav and Rabbi Yochanan are speaking of where the woman's entree into the water was completely involuntary. The Rabbanan sheyardo lehaker. If the machlokes should be viewed according to the opinion of Rabbi Nosson's Rabbanon, that's the Brisa Rav Oshia, we must say that since the rabbis did require the knife thrower to entertain, or to have, I would say, intention for cutting the simonim, Rav must be arguing in such a case that the woman at least intended to bathe. So we have to have that minimum, like kavanas chituch, and here we have to have kavana l'shem enter into the bathtub. Rav and Rabbi Yochanan speaking of where the woman voluntarily entered the water to cool off her entire body by splashing each limb separately. She accidentally fell and immersed her entire body. Omar Rava shachad para v'shachad behema acheres ima. So he shechted a para duma, and at the same time he shechted an animal of chulin. Divrei hakol psula. Even Rabbi Nasa would concede that the para duma's shchita is invalid. Why is that? Yeah, because any of the avodos that prepare the paraduma have to be done purely for the sake of the avodah paraduma, not for any additional purpose. And here, he did a shchita for the purpose of another animal, an animal of chulin. Nishchata behema cheres. But what happens if unintentionally, but simultaneously, he shechted another animal with the paraduma? And in that case, he didn't have in mind any other purpose because it was totally unintentional. The Rabbi Nasan, para psula behema ksheira. As far as shchitas chulin is concerned, so Rabbi Nasan's of the opinion you don't need kavana. So even though he shechted the animal of chulin unintentionally, nevertheless, ksheira. But as far as the paraduma is concerned, since we're saying that what? That he doesn't need kavana for shchita, so therefore in this case he has another purpose which he achieves, namely the shchita of the chulin. That passes the para. L'Rabbana, it's just punkt fakir. Para kshera and behema psula. Right, the behema is invalid because he didn't have kavana. It was totally unintentional. Yeah, but paradoxically, once you say that the behema is psula, then Mamela he wasn't involved in another shchita and parak shev. Frekte gemar pshita nishchita behema acheres Rabbi Nasan itzrich lei. We need a chiddush according to Rabbi Nasan. In the case of nishchita behema acheres salket, that I would have thought b'shachat osa omar achmona. With regard to the paraduma, it says osa. And that implies that the Kohen has to have the exclusive intention for the paraduma. Osa. What's the case? He shechs two paraduma at the same time. I don't know how they got two of them. We could barely get one of them. But anyway. I would have thought that where the Kohen slaughtered the parah together with Beimas Chulin, that would not be a psul, because I guess it's min b'sheino mino eino chotzes. Let's see if he says that. The Kohen was not distracted by the paraduma, and this osa only prohibits the simultaneous slaughtering of two paradumos. All right, he doesn't explain why. Okay, fine. I think it has to do with the principle of min b'sheino mino eno machriv. Kamash malah, and that's what he teaches me, osa v'lo osa, that if he simultaneously slaughters a behemas chulin, then the para is possible. Now we finish up. Chatak Dalas Ima. Let's say while he was shechting the paraduma, he also cut a gourd, a dalas, like a pumpkin. Is then Diryakol Psula. Rabbi Nosson and Rabbana both agree the paraduma is invalid because here, for sure, he was involved in another activity, namely cutting the gourd.
Right.
However, if let's say somehow the knife fell and cut the dalas along with the paraduma, but it was unintentional, is divriyakol kshera. Everybody agrees that the paraduma shchita is valid because he wasn't involved intentionally in any sort of side distraction or activity. Okay, then. So we somehow
Shkoyach.
survived the computer crash.
Yes. Sorry. I don't know.
That's okay. All right, let me wish you a very great week.
Okay. Yeah, you too.
Let's
Have
see,
a good week.
next Sunday, let's just think. Hmm, my granddaughter's getting married next Sunday.
Yeah, that's actually, I may have a problem also.
All right, so
I
let me
might
know
have
what
to
your
teach.
schedule is, and I'll see if I could take
Okay.
you to the tulips if you're available.
I might have to teach. I might have to teach all day. Okay.
Just if you can confirm it one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll send you an email.
Okay, thank you so much.